What if everything you knew, your marriage, your future, your identity, was built on a lie? Ethan Hayes was the golden boy of Silicon Valley, a tech genius with charm to spare. Olivia was his dazzling wife, 7 months pregnant and the envy of everyone who knew her. But one stormy Tuesday afternoon, Olivia came home early, and what she saw shattered everything. This isn't a story about heartbreak, it's about what came after. A plan so bold, so ruthlessly clever, it flipped the rules of revenge and power on their heads. This is the moment she stopped being the victim and became something else entirely. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. If emotional stories speak to you, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. You won't want to miss this one. Let's dive into it. The Hayes' residence on Crestview Drive was a monument to modern success. A symphony of glass, steel, and polished concrete, it cantilevered over the Emerald Hills overlooking the city, a testament to the architectural genius of its owner, Olivia Hayes, and the financial might of her husband, Ethan. From the infinity pool that bled into the horizon, you could watch the city lights glitter like a fallen constellation. It was a house that whispered, "We've made it." And they had. Ethan Hayes, at 34, was the golden boy of the tech world. His company, InnovateX, had revolutionized data security with an algorithm he'd coded in his dorm room a decade ago. He was sharp, impossibly charismatic, and possessed a restless energy that seemed to power the city itself. He was the man on the cover of Forbes, the speaker at every major tech conference, the husband who still looked at his wife like she was the only woman in the world. Olivia, at 32, was his perfect counterpart. An acclaimed architect from a family of academics, she possessed a quiet strength and an artist's eye. She saw the world in lines, angles, and potential. She had designed their home, not as a showpiece, but as a sanctuary. Every room was meant to frame a view, to capture the light, to create a feeling of serene, unbreachable peace. Now, that peace was about to be shattered. She was 7 months pregnant with their first child, a boy. The pregnancy had softened her edges, filling her with a profound and joyful sense of purpose that eclipsed even her professional accolades. Today, she was coming home early from her final site visit before maternity leave, a file tucked under her arm containing the sonogram from her morning appointment. She'd had them print an extra copy, a perfect black and white profile of their son, which she planned to frame for Ethan's desk as a surprise. The rain began to fall as her Tesla whispered up the long, winding driveway. It was a soft, melancholic drizzle that blurred the edges of the manicured gardens. The house stood silent, its vast windows like dark, unblinking eyes. Ethan was supposed to be in back-to-back meetings downtown until 7. It was only 3 o'clock. She felt a small, pleasant thrill at the thought of having the house to herself for a few hours, to curl up in the reading nook overlooking the valley and just be. She keyed in the code, the electronic lock chirping its familiar welcome. The air inside was different. Still. Too still. The faint, cloying scent of a perfume she didn't recognize hung in the air. A floral note. Jasmine, maybe? That was too sweet. Too aggressive for their minimalist home. A prickle of unease traced its way up her spine. "Ethan!" she called out, her voice absorbed by the cavernous space of the great room. No answer. A pair of women's shoes lay discarded near the base of the floating staircase. They were Louboutins, the iconic red soles a slash of crimson against the pale gray of the polished concrete floor. Not hers. Olivia's own sensible flats felt suddenly clumsy, childish. Her heart began to beat a little faster, a frantic bird trapped in her ribs. She walked past the kitchen, her hand trailing along the cool marble of the island. A half-empty bottle of champagne, Veuve Clicquot, their celebration champagne, sat sweating beside 2 flutes. One had a smear of coral pink lipstick on the rim. Denial is a powerful anesthetic. A client meeting, she told herself. He brought a client home. He forgot to tell me. But the shoes, the champagne, the cloying perfume, they were weaving a narrative she couldn't ignore. The silence from upstairs was no longer peaceful. It was heavy, suffocating. Her feet felt like lead as she ascended the staircase, her hand gripping the cool steel of the railing. Each step was a lifetime. The sonogram photo in the file felt suddenly cold, a relic from another existence. The door to their master bedroom was slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see a silk blouse, the color of champagne, draped over the Eames chair in the corner. Then, a man's shirt, one of Ethan's custom-made charvets, lying in a heap beside it. And then, she heard it. A sound that would be burned into her memory forever. A soft feminine laugh, quickly muffled, followed by the low murmur of her husband's voice. Time seemed to warp, stretching and compressing. The blood rushed in her ears, a roaring ocean. Her carefully constructed world, her sanctuary of glass and light, was fracturing around her. With a hand that trembled so violently she could barely control it, she pushed the door open. The scene before her was a tableau from a nightmare. The vast floor-to-ceiling window behind their bed framed the rainy cityscape, a backdrop of muted grays and blues. But Olivia's eyes were fixed on the bed itself, on the tangled mess of white linen sheets, on the pale, naked back of a woman with long, dark hair spread across her pillow, and on her husband, Ethan, who was propped up on one elbow, leaning over the woman, whispering something that made her laugh again. He turned his head at the sound of the door swinging open. His eyes met Olivia's. For a single, eternal second, the world stopped. The smile on Ethan's face didn't just vanish. It was wiped away, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. His face went white, then a blotchy red. He looked like a man who had just witnessed his own death. The woman beneath him, sensing the sudden tension, rolled over. Olivia knew her. Chloe Sterling. A rising star in InnovateX's marketing department. Ambitious, sharp, and young. So young. She was 26, maybe 27. She had been at their Christmas party, laughing and telling Olivia how much she admired her work. Now, she was in Olivia's bed, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and defiance, clutching the sheet to her chest. The silence was broken only by the sound of the file slipping from Olivia's numb fingers. It hit the hardwood floor with a soft thud. The sonogram photo slid out, landing face up, the tiny, perfect profile of their unborn son, a silent witness to his father's betrayal. Ethan scrambled from the bed, grabbing for his discarded trousers. "Liv," he stammered, his voice a raw, broken thing. "Olivia. Oh God, it's not what it looks like." The sheer, pathetic stupidity of the cliché was what finally broke through Olivia's shock. A sound tore from her throat, a laugh that was half a sob, half a scream. It was the sound of a heart breaking. "It's not what it looks like," she repeated, her voice eerily calm, devoid of inflection. She looked from her husband's panicked face to the woman in her bed, then down at the picture of their son on the floor. "Really, Ethan? Then tell me. Tell me what it looks like. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're fucking a subordinate in our bed. In the house I built for us. While your pregnant wife is at a doctor's appointment, looking at pictures of our child." Every word was a shard of ice. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. That would come later. Right now, a strange glacial clarity was descending upon her. She was an architect watching a demolition. The structure was compromised. The foundation was gone. The only thing to do was to step back and assess the wreckage. Chloe Sterling, seeing her opportunity, scurried from the bed, gathering her clothes with frantic, clumsy movements. She wouldn't look at Olivia. She couldn't. She was a ghost, an intruder, and she knew it. "Get out," Olivia said, her voice still quiet, but now laced with steel. Her gaze was fixed on the younger woman. "Get your things and get out of my house." Chloe fumbled with her blouse, her hands shaking. She shot a desperate, pleading look at Ethan, who could only stand there, paralyzed by his own guilt. He was powerless. In that moment, he was no longer the millionaire tech mogul. He was just a boy caught with his hand in the cookie jar, and his mother had just walked in. Without another word, Chloe fled, her red-soled heels clattering down the floating staircase, a sound like frantic, fading heartbeats. The front door opened and closed, and then silence again. A new kind of silence, thick with shame and the ghosts of broken vows. Olivia finally looked back at Ethan. He stood before her, half-dressed, a pathetic figure against the backdrop of their magnificent life. The rain streamed down the glass wall behind him, as if the sky itself were weeping for her. "Liv, please," he begged, taking a step toward her. "Let me explain. We can fix this. I can fix this." Olivia bent down, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were moving through water. Her hand was steady as she picked up the sonogram photo. She held it up, her eyes locking with his. "Fix this?" she whispered, and the whisper was more terrifying than any shout. "You think this is a bug in your code, Ethan? Something you can just patch and reboot?" She looked around the room. Her sanctuary. The jasmine-scented air was now a poison. The bed was a crime scene. The house itself felt tainted, its beautiful clean lines now seeming to mock her. She turned and walked out of the bedroom, leaving him standing in the wreckage. She walked down the stairs, past the lipstick-stained champagne flute, and out the front door into the rain. She didn't know where she was going. She just knew she couldn't be in that glass house for one more second, because it had just become her prison. And as the cold rain soaked her clothes, mingling with the hot, silent tears that finally began to fall, she made a vow. He had torn down her world. Now, she would build a new one, and he would watch. The first 48 hours were a blur of managed chaos. Olivia didn't go to her parents or her sister. She didn't call her best friend and unload in a torrent of tears. To do so would be to make it real in a way she wasn't ready for. It would invite pity, and pity was a luxury she could not afford. Pity was quicksand. Instead, she drove to the Four Seasons in the city, checked into a suite under her maiden name, and turned off her phone. For 2 days, she existed in the sterile, anonymous luxury of the hotel room. She ordered room service she didn't eat. She took baths that went cold. She sat on the balcony, wrapped in a thick hotel robe, and watched the rain lash against the window. Her mind a maelstrom of grief, rage, and a terrifying, hollow emptiness. The architect in her saw the demolition in stark, brutal detail. The foundation of trust pulverized, the support beams of shared dreams snapped, the glass walls of their future shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Ethan, predictably, fell apart. He left dozens of voicemails, swinging wildly from panicked apologies to desperate declarations of love. He sent texts that read like frantic, disjointed prayers. He had security try to track her credit card, but she had paid for the hotel in cash. He was a man who could control global data streams, but he couldn't find his own wife. The loss of control was driving him mad. On the third morning, Olivia woke up, and the storm inside her had passed. In its place was a cold, hard, and unnervingly calm resolve. The grief was still there, a solid, heavy weight in her chest, but it was no longer in control. She was. She had cried all her tears. Now it was time to draw up a new blueprint. She turned her phone back on and was immediately assaulted by the barrage of notifications. She ignored them all, except one, an email from her lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Jessica Albright, whom she had contacted from the hotel's business center. The subject line was simple. Initial assessment. Olivia spent the next hour on the phone with Jessica, her voice low and steady. She laid out the facts with the dispassionate precision of a contractor listing damages. There was no hysteria, no wailing. Jessica, who had handled the ugliest divorces in the city, was audibly impressed. "Most women in your position are emotional wrecks," Jessica said. "They want to burn everything to the ground. It's satisfying for a minute, but it's terrible strategy." "I'm not interested in revenge, Jessica," Olivia replied, her gaze fixed on the cityscape outside her window. "Revenge is an emotional decision. I'm interested in building. I need assets, I need security, and I need autonomy. For me, and for my son." "Good," Jessica said. "That I can work with. So we file for divorce on grounds of infidelity. With the prenup, you're entitled to the house, a significant settlement, and generous child support. We can bleed him dry." Olivia was silent for a moment. The obvious path. The clean break. Leave with her millions and her broken heart, and raise her son alone. It was the expected move. And that's why she wasn't going to do it. A divorce would be a war, a public spectacle. The media would have a field day. Tech moguls' messy split. Their lives would be picked apart by strangers. Ethan, cornered and humiliated, would fight back. It would be long, ugly, and draining. And in the end, she would still be Olivia Hayes, the millionaire's scorned ex-wife. Her identity would forever be tied to his betrayal. No, she wouldn't be a footnote in Ethan's story. She was going to be the author of her own. "No," Olivia said, her voice firm. "We're not filing for divorce." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Olivia, I'm not sure I understand. He cheated on you. In your home. While you're pregnant." "I'm aware of the facts, Jessica," Olivia said coolly. "A divorce is what he expects. It's what everyone expects. It gives him an easy out. He pays his dues, suffers some public shame, and in a year he's back on the cover of Forbes with a new, younger woman on his arm, having learned a valuable lesson. I'm not interested in giving him his redemption arc." She took a deep breath. "I have a different proposal. A business arrangement." Ethan was pacing the great room of the glass house like a caged animal when she finally walked in. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot. His designer stubble was now a ragged beard, and he was wearing the same clothes he'd had on 2 days ago. The house, usually immaculate, was a mess. Glasses were left out. Cushions were askew. It was as if the chaos in his soul had manifested in the space around him. He stopped dead when he saw her. "Liv! Oh God, Liv!" He rushed toward her, his hands outstretched. Olivia held up a single hand, stopping him in his tracks. Her gesture was not dramatic. It was definitive. A wall had just been erected between them, as real as any she had ever designed. "Don't," she said. Her voice was flat. "Sit down, Ethan. We need to talk." He looked utterly lost, but he obeyed, sinking onto the white leather sofa that suddenly seemed too big for him. Olivia remained standing, a deliberate power move. She placed a sleek, leather-bound folder on the coffee table between them. "I've spent the last 2 days thinking," she began, her tone that of a CEO opening a board meeting. "I've considered all our options. Divorce is the most obvious one." Hope, pathetic and desperate, flickered in his eyes. "Liv, we don't have to. We can go to therapy. I'll do anything. I'll quit my job. I'll sell the company. Whatever it takes." She gave a small, humorless smile. "You're not listening, Ethan. I said I've considered it. I've decided against it. For now." His relief was palpable. "Thank you. Oh God, thank you." "Don't thank me yet," she said, her eyes like chips of ice. "This is not a reconciliation. This is a contract. A new prenup, if you will, for a marriage that is now, for all intents and purposes, a business partnership." She slid the folder across the table. "Open it." With trembling hands, he did. Inside were documents drafted by Jessica Albright's firm. It wasn't a divorce filing. It was a post-nuptial agreement, a blueprint for a new reality. Olivia began to speak, outlining the terms as he scanned the pages in disbelief. "1," she said. "We will remain married. We will maintain a public front of unity for the sake of the company's stability and for our son. We will attend events together. We will smile for the cameras. In this house, however, we will live entirely separate lives. You will move into the guest wing. You will not enter my side of the house, which includes the master suite and the nursery, without my express permission." He looked up, his face ashen. "Olivia, too," she continued, ignoring him. "All our joint liquid assets will be transferred into a trust for our son, which I will solely manage. Your salary, your bonuses, your stock dividends, they will be split. 50% goes into the trust. 40% goes into a private account in my name. You will live on the remaining 10%. He flinched as if she had slapped him. 10% of his income was still a fortune, but it was the principal. It was a punishment, an allowance. 3, she said, her voice dropping slightly as she came to the most important point. You will cede full control and ownership of the Blackwood Project to me, effective immediately. The Blackwood Project was Ethan's forgotten pet project, a dilapidated, historically significant warehouse district downtown that InnovateX had bought years ago with the vague intention of turning it into a new tech campus. But the project was a logistical nightmare: zoning issues, heritage building restrictions, environmental surveys. Ethan, ever the innovator, had gotten bored with the slow grind of real estate development and had shelved it. But Olivia had never forgotten it. She had seen the potential in the old brick buildings, the beautiful industrial bones beneath the grime. She had a vision for it. A mixed-use urban village with sustainable housing, artisan workshops, green spaces, and a community arts hub. It was ambitious. It was her dream project. Ethan stared at her, finally understanding. This wasn't just about money. "You want Blackwood?" he whispered, incredulous. "I want more than that," she said. "The project is currently owned by an InnovateX subsidiary. You will sign over the subsidiary to a new holding company in my name. You will also provide the initial seed capital for redevelopment, as outlined on page 7. $50 million. He choked. $50 million? Liv, that's not seed capital. That's the entire projected budget. It's the price of my silence, Ethan, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. It's the price of me standing by your side at the next shareholders meeting instead of standing beside a divorce attorney. It's the price of the world continuing to see you as Ethan Hayes, the family man and tech genius, instead of Ethan Hayes, the adulterer who destroyed his pregnant wife. She leaned forward slightly. You built your empire on code. I am an architect. I build things in the real world, with steel and concrete and glass. You've given me a pile of rubble. Now, you're going to give me the tools to build something new from it, something that is entirely mine. He looked down at the papers, then back up at her. He was seeing a woman he didn't recognize. The warm, loving artist he had married was gone. In her place was a formidable strategist with a will of iron. He had broken her heart, and in doing so, he had forged it into a weapon. "And Chloe Sterling?" he asked, his voice barely audible. "She's to be fired," Olivia stated, without a flicker of emotion. "With a generous severance package and an ironclad non-disclosure agreement. She is to vanish from our lives. If I ever see her, hear her name, or smell her perfume again, this deal is off the table, and Jessica Albright will unleash hell. Is that clear?" He nodded, defeated. The fight had gone out of him. He was looking at the consequences of his actions, not in tears and screams, but in cold, hard, legally binding print. "This is my blueprint, Ethan," Olivia said, standing up straight. "These are my terms. You have 24 hours to have your lawyers review it and sign. If you refuse, or if you try to negotiate a single clause, I will walk out that door, and the next time you hear from me will be via a court summons that will be the lead story on every news outlet by lunchtime." She turned and walked toward the grand staircase, her posture perfect, her steps even. She was no longer a victim fleeing a crime scene. She was a queen reclaiming her castle. At the top of the stairs, she paused and looked back at him. a solitary figure adrift in the vast, beautiful room she had designed. "Welcome to our new marriage, Ethan," she said, her voice echoing in the silent house. "I hope you enjoy the guest wing." The 24 hours Olivia gave Ethan stretched into an eternity. He did as she commanded, his movements automated, his mind numb. He called his lawyer, a corporate shark named Marcus Thorne, who listened to the terms of Olivia's post-nup with a mixture of disbelief and professional admiration. "My God, Ethan," Marcus said, a low whistle escaping his lips. "She's not taking you to the cleaners. She's taking the whole damn laundromat. The Blackwood subsidiary, $50 million in seed capital. This isn't a post-nup. It's a corporate takeover executed with a scalpel." "Just tell me if it's legal, Marcus," Ethan said, his voice flat. He was sitting in the guest wing, which felt like a sterile, foreign country. He could hear the faint, muffled sounds of Olivia moving around in the main part of the house. The soft click of a door. The rush of water. Each sound was a reminder of the chasm that now separated them. "Oh, it's ironclad," Marcus confirmed. "Albright is the best. There's a duress clause, of course, but trying to prove she coerced you would mean airing every last piece of your dirty laundry in public. Which is precisely what this document is designed to prevent. It's brilliant, in a terrifying sort of way. You're trapped, Ethan. She's checkmated you." Ethan knew it. He had spent his life building systems of control, algorithms that anticipated every move, every possibility. But he had never anticipated this. He had never factored in the variable of Olivia's strength, a quiet force he had mistaken for fragility. He had thought her love was a given, a constant in his equation. He now understood it had been a gift, one he had carelessly thrown away. He signed the papers. The first few weeks of their new arrangement were a masterclass in cold civility. They were ghosts haunting the same magnificent house. Ethan would rise early and leave before she came downstairs. He would return late after she had retired to the master suite, the door firmly closed. The only evidence of their shared space was the occasional note left on the kitchen island, a reminder about a bill, a question about the InnovateX gala they were now contractually obligated to attend together. Their public appearances were flawless performances. At the gala, Olivia was radiant in a custom-designed gown that elegantly draped over her 8-month belly. She stood by his side, a serene smile on her face, her hand resting lightly on his arm. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple, on the cusp of welcoming their first child. The whispers about Chloe Sterling's abrupt departure from the company were quickly silenced by the sheer force of their united front. But as Ethan stood beside her, smiling for the cameras, he felt a cold dread. Her touch was weightless, impersonal. Her smile never reached her eyes. He was standing next to a beautiful, brilliant stranger who knew all his secrets. He would catch a glimpse of her across a crowded room, laughing with a city council member or discussing blueprints with a developer, and he would be struck by a profound and painful longing. He wasn't just losing his wife, he was witnessing her rebirth, and he was no part of it. Olivia, meanwhile, threw herself into the Blackwood project with a ferocity that stunned everyone. She set up a small, lean office in one of the less dilapidated warehouses, a stark contrast to the gleaming towers of InnovateX. The space smelled of old brick, damp earth, and potential. This was her territory. She didn't hire a massive team. She handpicked a small group of hungry, innovative thinkers. A young urban planner who specialized in sustainable design, a gruff but brilliant structural engineer who had been forced into early retirement, and a fiery community organizer who knew the neighborhood block by block. She was not Olivia Hayes, the wife of a tech mogul. Here, she was just Olivia, the architect. She was on site every day, her pregnancy be damned, climbing over rubble in steel-toed boots, her brow furrowed in concentration as she studied old city maps and new environmental reports. She was in her element. The project was more than just steel and concrete. It was her reclamation. Every zoning permit she secured, Every blueprint she finalized was a piece of her shattered identity being put back together, stronger and more resilient than before. Ethan watched from a distance, his 10% life feeling hollow and absurd. He received daily reports from the Blackwood subsidiary's new CFO, a woman loyal to Olivia, detailing the project's progress and expenditures. He saw the $50 million he had signed over being meticulously allocated, and it felt like watching his own blood being transfused into a new, vibrant body that was not his. One evening, he came home earlier than usual. He found Olivia in the kitchen, a place she usually avoided when he was there. She was standing at the island, looking over a large blueprint, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. She didn't seem to notice him. She was completely absorbed, her face alive with a passion he hadn't seen in years, not since she had been designing their own home. "It's going to have a public park in the center," she said softly, more to herself than to him, "with a bioswale to manage rainwater runoff, and the south-facing roofs will all be solar." He stood in the doorway, a silent observer. "Liv," he said, his voice hoarse. She looked up, startled. Her face immediately became guarded, the professional mask snapping back into place. "Ethan, I thought you had a dinner meeting." "It was canceled," he said. He took a hesitant step into the room. "I saw the latest progress report. It's impressive." "It's a sound investment," she replied coolly, rolling up the blueprint. The air was thick with unspoken words. He wanted to tell her he was sorry. Not just for the affair, but for everything. For not seeing her. For taking her for granted. For letting the shine of his own success blind him to the brilliance of hers. But the words were stuck in his throat, choked by the terms of their contract. Apologies were not part of the deal. "Our son," he began, his voice cracking slightly. "He's due soon." "In 3 weeks," she confirmed, her hand moving to her stomach in an unconscious, protective gesture. "I want to be there," he said, the words rushing out. "At the birth. I know the terms of our arrangement, but he's my son too. Please, Olivia." She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. He saw a flicker of the old Olivia, the woman he had married, a flash of vulnerability in her eyes before the architect's mask descended again. "You will be there," she said finally, her voice devoid of warmth. "It's important for the narrative. The devoted father. It's good for the brand." The words hit him like a physical blow. The brand, their marriage, their child, all reduced to a marketing strategy. It was a cruelty so precise, so perfectly aimed, he knew he deserved it. 3 weeks later, Leo Hayes was born. Ethan was there, as promised. He held Olivia's hand, not as her husband, but as a silent partner in a joint venture. He cut the umbilical cord, his hands shaking, and when the nurse placed the tiny, screaming baby in his arms, his world tilted on its axis. He looked at his son, his perfect, innocent son, and then at Olivia, her face pale and exhausted, but filled with a fierce, primal love that was directed solely at the child in her arms. In that moment, Ethan understood the true extent of his loss. He hadn't just broken a marriage, he had forfeited a family. He had his name on the birth certificate. He had a room waiting in the guest wing of the house. But he was a father with no rights, a husband with no wife, a king in a glass castle, utterly and completely alone. And across the city, in a dusty warehouse district, the foundation for his wife's new empire was being laid, brick by painful brick. The first year of Leo's life passed in a structured, carefully managed rhythm dictated entirely by Olivia. The glass house was no longer a home. It was a high-end co-parenting facility. Ethan's access to his son was laid out in a shared digital calendar with the cold precision of a business schedule. E.H. Leo time, 7 Kanze IM, 8:30 a.m., and E.H. Leo story, time, 6 Hans p.m., 6:45 p.m. During these allotted slots, Ethan would emerge from the guest wing and enter the main house, his heart pounding with a mixture of love and trepidation. Olivia was usually present, a silent, watchful supervisor. She would sit in a nearby armchair, ostensibly reading a report or answering emails on her tablet. But he knew her attention was fixed on him. He felt like an intern on probation. He learned to parent under a microscope. He became an expert at changing diapers, warming bottles, and mastering the gentle rocking motion that soothed Leo's cries. He did it all with a desperate, clumsy tenderness. These brief, rationed moments with his son were the only real thing in his life. The rest was a charade, running a company he no longer cared about, living on an allowance that felt like a mockery, and sleeping in a bed that was a nightly reminder of his exile. He saw the man he used to be with sickening clarity. The arrogance, the entitlement, the casual cruelty of his betrayal. He had believed his own hype, thinking the rules didn't apply to him. Now, he was living in a world of rules, all of them written by the woman whose heart he had shattered. Meanwhile, Olivia thrived. Motherhood did not slow her down. It focused her. She was a force of nature, seamlessly blending the roles of doting mother and ruthless developer. She'd be on a conference call negotiating the price of reclaimed timber while bouncing Leo on her hip, her voice never wavering. Her small office at the Blackwood site expanded, and the project, which she had officially named Blackwood Commons, was becoming the talk of the city. It was more than a development. It was a statement. She had rejected the cold, sterile aesthetic of modern tech campuses in favor of something warm, human, and sustainable. She prioritized local artisans, insisted on green building materials, and designed public spaces that encouraged community interaction. She was building the anti-Innovatex, the anti-Ethan. And it was beautiful. The press, which had once fawned over Ethan, was now captivated by Olivia. She was the rising star, the visionary architect creating a new heart for the city. They called her the architect of the future. In interviews, she was poised and brilliant. When asked about her husband, she would smile serenely and say, "Ethan is incredibly supportive. He's a wonderful father, and his belief in this project has made it all possible. Each public declaration of his support was a perfectly sharpened knife for Ethan." He was a prop in her success story, the silent, check-writing husband in the background. He had wanted to be the hero of his own story, but he was now a supporting character in hers. The first major crack in their carefully constructed arrangement appeared 18 months after Leo's birth. The Blackwood Commons was entering its most critical phase of construction, and Olivia was working around the clock. She was leveraged to the hilt, having poured every cent of the initial seed capital and secured massive loans based on the project's future earnings. The crisis came from an unexpected quarter. A powerful, old-money real estate magnate, a man named Alistair Finch, had been quietly buying up properties surrounding the Blackwood site. Finch was a dinosaur of the old school. He built monolithic glass towers and had no patience for Olivia's artisanal nonsense. He saw her success as a threat to his dominance. Finch launched a hostile campaign. He used his influence at City Hall to challenge her zoning variances, tying her up in bureaucratic red tape. He filed frivolous environmental lawsuits, forcing costly delays. He poached 2 of her key contractors with offers they couldn't refuse. It was a war of attrition, designed to bleed her dry and force her to sell the project to him for pennies on the dollar. Olivia fought back with everything she had. She worked later, pushed harder, her face etched with a familiar stress that Ethan recognized. He saw her one night, long after Leo was asleep, staring at a spreadsheet on her laptop, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The invincible architect looked, for the first time, vulnerable. He found himself hovering in the doorway of the great room. Their contract forbade him from interfering in her business. It was her empire, her fight. But watching her struggle, Watching this old vulture try to tear down the beautiful thing she was building ignited a protective instinct he thought he had lost. "It's Finch, isn't it?" he said softly. She looked up, her eyes flashing with anger, as if his presence were an intrusion on her private pain. "This is my concern, Ethan. It has nothing to do with you." "He's trying to break you," Ethan continued, taking a step into the room. "He's using delay tactics to trigger the penalty clauses in your loan agreements. If you miss your completion deadline, the interest rates will skyrocket. He's trying to force a default." She stared at him, surprised by the accuracy of his analysis. She had forgotten that beneath the wreckage of their marriage lay the mind of a brilliant strategist. "My lawyers are handling it," she said stiffly, turning back to her screen. "Your lawyers are litigators. You don't need a lawyer right now, Olivia. You need a weapon," he said. He walked over to the coffee table and picked up a stylus and a tablet. He began sketching, not lines of a building, but a web of connections, a flowchart of power. "Finch Consolidated is a publicly traded company," he said, his voice gaining the old energy and focus she remembered. "But his real power comes from his private equity firm, Finch Capital. It's a black box, but it's not infallible." He started talking about shell corporations, leveraging minority shareholder positions, and launching a proxy fight. He spoke of data analytics, of finding Finch's digital pressure points. It was the language of corporate warfare, a language he spoke fluently. He was mapping out a counterattack so audacious, so complex, it made her lawyer's strategies look like playground squabbles. Olivia watched him, mesmerized. For the first time in nearly 2 years, he wasn't Ethan, the penitent exile. He was Ethan Hayes, the founder of InnovateX, the man who could see the patterns no one else could. He wasn't looking at her with guilt or longing, but with the focused intensity of a partner solving a problem. "You could use InnovateX's data analysis division," he said, his eyes gleaming. "We could build a predictive model of his financial network, find his weakest link, and exploit it. We could bury him in his own paperwork." She was silent for a long time, the tablet glowing between them. The air was charged with a new, unfamiliar energy. Her contract, her blueprint for their separate lives, had not accounted for this. It had not accounted for a scenario where she might need him. Not his money, but his mind. His particular brand of genius. To accept his help would be to blur the lines she had so carefully drawn. It would mean letting him back in, not as a husband, but as an ally. It was a dangerous proposition. But the alternative, losing everything she had fought so hard to build, was unthinkable. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why would you do this? It's not in the contract." Ethan finally looked up from the tablet, his eyes meeting hers. The strategic fire in them softened, replaced by a raw, aching sincerity. "Because he's trying to destroy something beautiful," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "And because I know what it's like to tear down something beautiful. And I can't stand by and watch it happen again. Especially not to you." He paused, taking a breath. "And because he's trying to take away the future of my son's mother. This has everything to do with me." In his words, she didn't hear a plea for forgiveness or a strategy for reconciliation. She heard a truth so simple and profound, it shook the foundations of the wall she had built around her heart. He wasn't trying to save himself. He was trying to save her. And in that moment, the architect and the innovator, the estranged wife and the exiled husband, were no longer on opposite sides of a contract. They were two people facing a common enemy, with the fate of an empire hanging in the balance. The decision to accept Ethan's help was not a surrender. It was a strategic pivot. Olivia laid out the new terms with the same precision she had used for their first contract. "This is a temporary alliance, Ethan, a joint venture with a single objective, neutralizing Alistair Finch," she stated, her voice firm. They were in her office at Blackwood Commons, a neutral territory. The air smelled of sawdust and fresh paint, a scent of progress. "We do not discuss the past. We do not discuss our arrangement. We are business partners. Nothing more. Understood, Ethan agreed, his expression serious. He knew this was a test. Any attempt to cross the lines she had drawn would shatter this fragile truce. And so began the war. It was fought not on construction sites, but in the digital ether. The guest wing of the glass house transformed into a covert operations center. Ethan, re-energized and focused, brought the full, formidable power of InnovateX to bear. He assembled a small, loyal team from his data analysis division. Tech wizards who could trace money through the darkest corners of the internet. They worked late into the night, long after Leo was asleep. The great room, once a symbol of their fractured life, became their war room. Blueprints for Blackwood Commons were pinned up alongside complex network diagrams mapping Finch's corporate empire. For the first time in 2 years, they shared a space without the suffocating weight of their personal history. They were united by a common goal, their minds locked in a dance of strategy and counter-strategy. Olivia had never seen Ethan like this, not even in the early days of InnovateX. He was relentless, brilliant, and utterly in his element. He would pace the room, firing off ideas, connecting disparate pieces of information with breathtaking speed. And she was his equal, her deep understanding of urban planning and real estate law providing the real-world context for his digital attacks. She would point to a weakness in Finch's property portfolio. He would devise a way to exploit it online. One night, hunched over a satellite map of Finch's holdings, their heads were bent close together. Her hair brushed against his cheek, and the faint scent of her shampoo, a clean, citrusy fragrance he remembered so well, filled his senses. He froze for a fraction of a second. She pulled back slightly, a flicker of awareness in her eyes. The air crackled with unspoken electricity. The business partners were, for a moment, just a man and a woman in a quiet house. "We should focus," she said, her voice a little too sharp as she pointedly tapped the screen. The moment passed, but the memory of it lingered. The wall between them, once solid concrete, now felt like porous stone. Their strategy was multi-pronged and devastating. Ethan's team launched a phantom shareholder movement, using a network of anonymous online forums to rally Finch's disgruntled minority investors, sowing dissent within his own company. Simultaneously, they uncovered a series of environmental violations at one of Finch's older, forgotten properties. Violations he had paid to keep buried for years. They leaked the information not to a major news network, but to a small, fiercely independent environmental blog. The story caught fire, and Finch, who prided himself on his public image, was suddenly mired in a PR nightmare. Alistair Finch, the old lion, was bewildered. He was being attacked from a dozen different directions at once. His legal challenges to Blackwood Commons were mysteriously delayed in committee. His stock price dipped. His carefully curated reputation was being dismantled online by an army of invisible enemies. He knew he was at war, but he couldn't see his opponent. The turning point came when Ethan's team found the real skeleton in Finch's closet, a secret offshore account in the Cayman Islands, used to funnel money to a corrupt city official in exchange for favorable zoning decisions a decade prior. It was the kill shot. "We have him," Ethan said, his voice quiet with triumph. It was nearly 3 a.m. They were alone in the great room, the city lights twinkling below. Leo was asleep upstairs. Olivia looked at the evidence on the screen, a clear, undeniable trail of corruption. They could destroy Finch completely, ruin his life, end his career. A year ago, she might have relished the thought. But something had shifted. "What do we do with it?" she asked. "We could leak it," Ethan suggested. "The district attorney would have a field day. He'd go to prison." Olivia shook her head slowly. "No, that's his move. That's what he would do to us." She looked at Ethan, her gaze direct and searching. "We're not him." In that moment, Ethan felt a surge of admiration so powerful, it almost brought him to his knees. She had been betrayed, humiliated, and attacked, yet she had not allowed the darkness of the world to extinguish her own light. She was fighting to win, but she was determined to do it on her own terms. "So what do you suggest, partner?" he asked, the word feeling more real than it ever had before. "We use it as leverage," she said. "We don't destroy him, we neutralize him." The next day, Olivia met Alistair Finch for coffee. She walked in alone, calm and composed. She slid a single piece of paper across the table, a bank transfer record with an account number and a name. Finch looked at it, and the color drained from his face. "All your lawsuits will be dropped," Olivia said, her voice soft but firm. "All your challenges at City Hall will be withdrawn. You will sell me the 3 properties you own bordering Blackwood Commons at their original market value, and you will never interfere with my business, or any business connected to me, ever again. In return, this," she tapped the paper, "disappears forever." Finch, the titan of industry, looked like a broken man. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly defeated. He nodded slowly. Unable to meet her eyes, Olivia walked out of the coffee shop and into the bright sunlight, feeling a sense of victory that was deeper than she had expected. She hadn't just saved her project, she had won on her own terms, without sacrificing her principles. That evening, a celebratory mood filled the house. Ethan had ordered dinner from their favorite Italian restaurant, the one they used to go to for anniversaries. He even opened a bottle of Veuve Clicquot. "To a successful joint venture," he said, raising his glass. "To success," she agreed, touching her glass to his. The chink of the crystal sounded different this time, less like a formality, more like a connection. They ate in a comfortable silence, the tension that had defined their relationship for 2 years finally gone. After dinner, as she was getting ready to head up to her room, a new variable entered the equation. Ethan's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his face went pale, the color draining from it just as it had from Alistair Finch's. "What is it?" Olivia asked, a knot of dread tightening in her stomach. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a new kind of horror. A ghost from the past had just reappeared. "It's a text message," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He turned the phone around so she could see the screen. It was from an unknown number. The message was only 3 words, but they were enough to detonate the fragile peace they had just built. It read, "I'm back, Ethan," and beneath the text was a recent photo of Chloe Sterling smiling, holding a baby with Ethan's eyes,